It is my pleasure to introduce to you two people who are doing just that. Mr. Farouk Khan is Senior Director of Business Development in Acumen. He's an experienced entrepreneur and leading business and financial advisor with experience from overseeing most of the largest mergers and acquisitions and foreign direct investments in the history of Pakistan. Tsitsi Wouters is Director of Innovative Finance of UBS Optimus Foundation, with responsibility for innovative financing programs with focus on financial, legal, and operational aspects. He has a distinguished background in finance, having various roles in strategy, mergers and acquisitions, and performance management. Please welcome Farouk Khan and Tsitsi Wouters.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to stand over here.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
I'm going to start direct. Yeah, I can stand and find your places. Okay. Tsitsi, why do we need philanthropy to be more efficient, do you think?
Well, I want to maybe efficient is maybe a little bit a dangerous word because that would imply that it's not efficient at the moment. It's maybe more of a perception issue where a certain group of funders might not be willing or interested to fund various development programs at the moment, and by providing transparency, providing a different return perspective, we would like to see and like to draw in much more funders into this space.
So it's about how you present or how you communicate the impact or the work in progress.
Exactly, but also how you structure some of the programs so that you can present it in a certain way.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Farouk, would you like to add anything on that?
I mean, I thank you. I agree with that. And I guess at the most basic level, we need philanthropy to be more efficient and effective to really change the lives of over 2 billion people who live in poverty. I believe we are at a really exciting time in history where technology, the immense creation of wealth, the focus on philanthropy really gives us a chance, perhaps for the first time in history, to really solve some of the most intractable problems that are being faced by humanity. Things like water, health, education, things that anyone in the 21st century should be able to take for granted, but a few billion people don't have access to them. And that really is, I think, the reason why every dollar, every Swedish krona needs to be used as efficiently and effectively as possible, which hopefully, as you were saying, will help draw in more people into this field.
Yes. Tsitsi, would you please tell us a bit more about Optimus Foundation and what you're doing?
Absolutely. So we're primarily a grant-making foundation linked to UBS, of course. We're funded with client donations, with which we fund a large number of projects. We're very critical in the types of projects that we fund, making sure that we really can achieve the most impact we think possible. And we've now decided to, since a few years, look at innovative finance, so returns-based finance models, where we look at return models to put our foundation capital forward, get returns, and see if we can get that capital back, including a return, with the return coming back to the foundation. So all the time the money stays within the philanthropic sector. This is not replacing grant funding in any way. This is in addition to the existing programs that we do, with the idea to engage a different type of client that is more interested in transparency, in seeing more business-like models being used in development programs. So more efficiency, a higher level of accountability, and very regular reporting. And like you say earlier on, technology is going to be a really big part in that, and that's also an element we're trying to bring in here, so we can really show that to our clients.
So what have you done in the innovating financing space recently?
It's a path that we've been on for a few years now. So there's a couple of programs that we've already developed, delivered. There's a couple we're working on at the moment, and there's a few that are in very, very early stages. And I'd maybe just like to go to the next slide to explain a little bit what our approach is to innovative finance and what we think our role could be. And I think, Farooq, you mentioned earlier, it's kind of a similar view
Yes.
that you have as well, where we see that we've been initially in the bottom quadrant, primarily providing grants. And we see that we can do more in the social finance space, where we do return-based models with an idea to scale our programs through development impact bonds, through impact loans, with an idea of making these either commercially viable and then bringing in, for example, UBS as a bank or other commercial investors, or proving that a model really works, and that's also really exciting stuff. To take a regional government, to get them invested, to get them to see this model works, and we're going to implement this in this region or nationally. And that's, for example, one of the goals in one of our development impact bonds in Rajasthan, is where we want to prove an intervention in health clinics and really take that national. The really cool thing would be that you would go national on a public funding level.
Yeah. Interesting. And how are you seeing the results that you're wishing for right now, or?
So at the moment we've done one development impact bond. It's a very small one in Rajasthan. We're now doing a second one. The first one has just concluded. The results will be published in about a month, and they've been really promising. And we've been we haven't been surprised because we've been tracking this program, but we've been really, really happy to see that this is going in the right direction, that we're actually able to achieve the education improvements on the ground in what was actually was quite a difficult program to execute. So in a month's time we'll broadcast those results, and they're really promising.
Interesting read then, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And also good. It's a really good thing to go into the second DIB, which is about 10 times bigger, which is now following on from that.
Wow, good. Farooq, tell us about Acumen and your role there.
Sure, thank you. And it's really exciting to see the work that UBS is doing, and we see a great deal of sort of the approach is very complementary in terms of creating enterprises that are sustainable, that can start small but then move up to be able to attract more traditional investment capital. And also, Acumen is focused more on providing equity. UBS Optimus is somewhat more focused on debt. So there is an exciting. But just to pull back and explain. When we started Acumen back in 2001, the big, I guess, conceptual shift at that time was that how do you use philanthropic capital but help create sustainable social enterprises rather than donor-driven ones? We invest philanthropic capital with entrepreneurs that are really trying to provide goods and services to the poor. We focus on people earning between about $2 to $4 a day.
Okay.
And how do you provide them education, health, energy, primarily in the off-grid communities at a price point that they can afford? So how do you develop business models that can cater to the poor? Where we invest is where we found there's what we call the pioneer gap, is where entrepreneurs have an idea. They've done some thinking about it, primarily funds from their own funds or family and friends, but how do they validate their idea? How do they prepare themselves to be able to scale up where more traditional either impact funds or other capital can flow in? And so as I was explaining, that's what we do. We take philanthropic capital because really the work is hard. It takes too long, requires immense amount of post-investment support to be able to scale up. And commercial capital will not go at that stage to support these. When we started, our thought was that it'll be a 4 to 6 year cycle before we could recycle our capital. In reality, it's more like 10 to 12 years, and hence the importance of philanthropic capital. Just to give, as an example, we invested in Delight back in 2007. At that time, it was an idea. They had a $35 solar lantern. There was no market for it. There was no financing for it. There was no last mile distribution for it. But we backed it at that time with $200,000. And now, almost 11 years later, they've brought light to over 80 million people. And we did a quick back of the envelope exercise. If we had given that 5 million as philanthropy, they would have been able to distribute lanterns to about 167,000 households, impacting about 1 million people. So you can imagine the level of charity that's needed to reach 82 million people. But more than that, what sometimes get lost when we talk about impact investing and doing well and doing good is also the impact when you treat someone as a customer as opposed to a recipient of a charity or a handout. The whole conversation, the interaction changes. And that's so important for people to be able to progress on their own, to give them that dignity.
So true.
And this is what overall, we've been able to achieve over the last 15 plus years. And there's real leverage in the model that we found. So for every dollar that we've invested, we found that our companies have raised a further $6. So we've invested just over 100 million, and we've catalyzed another 600 million that's flown into those companies. And you've impacted or served, over 270 million people.
Wow.
So the multiplier effect is very, very great compared to the traditional charity model. That's not to say that's not important. It's very important, but both approaches need to coexist depending on the circumstances.
Thank you. So just to clarify or narrow down, what is innovative financing to you? And why is it needed?
Sure. So I think when we started, just the concept of impact investing was innovative. I think if you Googled patient capital or impact investing back in 2001, you would have gotten very few hits. Now it'll literally be millions of pages. But since then, particularly on the equity side, we've just sharing sort of 4 examples of how we've pushed that idea forward, but understanding that all of this would not be possible without our philanthropic capital to start this work.
Yeah.
So in education, where we've used philanthropy, and it was actually started by, we were very fortunate by partners in Stockholm who helped us in education as a youngest portfolio, and some of them are here, I think, who helped us start our education work in India and Pakistan. Now we're working with 2 foundations to take that work to Africa, but as a recoverable grant model. So out of the 15 million, 10 million will be used for investing, and after 10 years, whatever capital comes back will be returned to those foundations, and 5 million will be given as pure philanthropy to help scale up those companies. So it's a iteration on a pure grant model for us. We are doing a agricultural fund focused on smallholder farmers in Africa, and a large multilateral has given equity as a first loss because it's a very high risk area, smallholder farmers. So we are hoping that with the first loss facility that this multilateral has committed, other more traditional investors will be able to come in because they know that 50% of their risk is covered. So it will help us catalyze other investors to come in, similar to what you were saying, that how do you scale up. Then our off-grid energy fund focused on East Africa is a pure private equity type model, but really set up to demonstrate that you can now, after 15 years of a company like Delight, invest traditional capital, mainstream capital, into the off-grid energy sector.
Okay.
And the last one in Latin America, again, smaller, but really even smaller than where we go early stage, but trying to discover what sort of business models can work in a post-conflict area.
So I'm going to get back to CS. I haven't
Sure.
forgotten you. I'm just going to ask that. How do you effectively measure these vehicles?
You know, that's really important, because when you stand up and people back you for creating impact, then you must be able to demonstrate that impact, and it's not easy. It's difficult, but it's really important. And we've been focused on how do you measure and communicate impact since inception. Um, but over the last few years, what we discovered was that there's a lot of conversations and a lot of talk about what to measure, but very little effort in the end on how to measure. So you
Sure.
raise impact funds, but in the end, it's big, broad generalizations rather than real data to support your work. And what we found with technology is, so although we've been focused on it since inception, but in the last 4 years, we've really been able to take it forward by using what we call lean data, which is using technology, low cost smartphones, mobile technology, to really, for the first time, being able to talk to low income customers. And that's really helped us, because real change comes from when you listen to people and build up after hearing what they need, rather than a top down approach, which is what most impact has almost been like compliance. And that's really helped, not just for us to learn very detailed information about them, but also our companies to see how their business models are working or not working. So we focus on impact in three broad areas, to determine the poverty level of the customers, because that's very important to us. Are the companies really serving the poor or not? And we use Grameen's PPI methodology to do that. Then the breadth of impact, how many people are being served, which is where most impact funds start and stop. And then the depth, using the net promoter score concept, again, getting feedback directly from the customers, that is there really any meaningful change to their lives through these goods or services or not. And over the last 2 to 3 years, we've spoken to about almost 60,000 low-income customers across the countries where we work in: India, Pakistan, Africa, and Latin America. And what is exciting is that many others in the sector are now using this approach for the first time. People like DFID, Omidyar Network, Gates Foundation, they have asked us to use our lean data methodology to help them assess their projects. So,
And are you?
and we are, of course, we are, and it's, and that's one of the great, things, as you were saying, that, we have to be, in many cases, catalysts as well. So everything that we do is available for everyone, is transparent, and the cost, the time taken to assess impact has really come down dramatically with this approach. And we're able to get really detailed, nuanced information. I mean, this is just a bare bone example of one of the companies, Ethio Chicken in Ethiopia, that 73% live below the World Bank poverty line. We couldn't have said that 2 years ago without doing this kind of work. We can maybe go into more detail later if you like. I don't want to talk too long.
Thank you. So what have you learned, or what have UBS Optimus learned from the first development impact bonds, and how can we transition that in order to scale up, as you were saying? How do you see that step?
Yeah, we're learning lots every day. I think we're learning more and more that the focus needs to be for us on ensuring we can lower transaction costs, and there's a few things there that can help a lot. Technology, of course, is very important there. Reporting, looking into concepts such as blockchain. We're looking at that, seeing if we can use that. I mean, not only the hype, but like really using the processes and technologies underlying to really make sure that we can improve the verification of impact, for example, verification of results. That'll be a very important step to make over the next few years. I think something that's even more important that we've been working on in the meantime is really educating the space. Once you start talking about returns-based finance, once you start talking about business models in the space, it creates a lot of confusion. It creates a lot of resistance. So it's something that needs to be handled very, very carefully. It requires a lot of interactions with people, with stakeholders, small steps, I'd say. to make sure that you get people on side. Also, that just in the practical aspects, when you work with an organization such as USAID, when you're talking about contracts, if you're speaking to people who've largely been doing grant-making contracts for their whole lives, and now need to do a DIB contract,
Yeah.
where there is a return element, that takes a while to understand and get that through the organization.
Yeah.
So there's also a process that we're encountering as we move into the space.
And will you be offering that kind of service help to other grant makers, or in the future maybe?
Well, and like Farouk said, what we try to do is be very, very transparent on everything.
Yeah.
So we evaluate the processes, also the transacting processes, and we generally all our documents become public, so that helps people to say, look, this is exactly how this deal was structured. This is how we could do it. This is how the second was structured. Look, these were the learnings, and to move together as a sector, because this is the big difference between us and the bank. An issue that we encounter every day is that we like to be as transparent as possible and share everything. All our contracts, all our dealings with our partners. And of course, as a bank, you need to be a bit more careful in that respect. So that's where, as a foundation, we sit separately, and we have a very different approach there.
So it's kind of open source goes
Absolutely.
impact industry.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to walk over here for everyone's information, unless you don't see it, to see if we have any questions. Yes. We had a more question to Farouk. What is the difference between a RECO variable grant and a loan, and why do you use the former?
Well, the essential difference is that a loan is a contractual obligation to repay, and if you don't, then you go into default. Whereas a recoverable grant would be something that allows you the flexibility. You may not get 100% of it back. You may get more than 100% of it back, but it allows you the flexibility to really, because we will be going very early stage in high risk entrepreneurial ideas. So it gives you that flexibility. And if you're not able to repay the 100%, then there is no contractual default.
Good, thank you. We had another one. Sietse, maybe you started a little bit on this. What do you see these financial products doing for NGOs that are still financed mostly by pure philanthropic gifts and the grant makers?
I think this could provide an additional funding stream. I wouldn't say that. Our goal is not to replace one by the other. No. Our view is really to get additionality, to get additional funding in, to employ these funds to do new activities, to explore new areas. But I think both are needed. And even in innovative finance, we do see that we need grants, particularly in the early stages, for example, to pilot a promising model. And yes, it could go wrong and maybe it doesn't work, but this is needed to really get new programs up and running and to scale programs. I mentioned blockchain earlier on, so initially we will need to do a few pilots in that space, and some of them may not succeed, but we need to take these risks in order to be able to achieve success in the longer term.
Thank you, so interesting. We have just one asked, where do you see this heading really? Or do you have a wish list or a call to action in terms of thinking? Farouk, would you start?
I think we have a real opportunity here, but I think there are a couple of things that we need to be mindful of. I think it's really important to be able to focus on and understand the impact, and I think it's important for investors and donors to demand that there is detailed information given on impact. This mantra of doing well as doing good is great, but we always start from the capital side. I think we have to start from what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and then see what kind of capital is best suited to solve that. Is it a grant? Is it pure investment capital? I think that is important. And I think the other thing, my wish list, I guess, would be that ultimately the real challenge is how do we hold all investments accountable for their impact and not just a small subsector,
Yeah.
called impact investing.
True. Sietse, would you like to add?
Absolutely, I can just echo that. I would just say that I think it's this can be a really interesting additional area for philanthropy, and I recommend everyone looks into it and investigates it.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you for letting us in on this new frontier of financing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's for
Thank
you. Thank you for
Thank you so much,
coming.
Linda.
And for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.